Okay, so thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for coming back after the first exam. Good for you guys. Let's start off in prayer. Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for this evening. I thank you for each person who is here tonight. Lord, I ask that you continue to bless them, that you continue to give them time to study, and Lord, that you give them long memories with what you're telling them, Lord, and what you would have them know. And Lord, I just thank you so much for the opportunity to be here in your midst, Lord, and just talking about your history of the church. And we ask it all in Christ's name. Amen. All right. So tonight, I want to start off on this side of the board real quick. I don't remember which one of you pointed this out to me, but on the study guide, there was, I think it was Brenda, actually. There was a thing, 2 slots for the School of Sinner and the Sanctuary of Saints, and I didn't actually go over that before the test, so I'm just going to go over it real quick just so you understand what it is. So basically, I should have, and it was my mistake, I should have talked about those 2 things when we were talking about Cyprian and Novatian in particular. So remember at the end of our last lecture, we were talking about this Emperor Decius and this really heavy 2 years worth of persecution that came down on the church. That persecution caused the church to, for lack of a better term, split into 3 groups. You had the group of people that died for Christ, those were the martyrs. You had the group of people called confessors who were tortured for Christ but didn't die and didn't deny him. And then you had this third group called the lapsed, who may have gone through some measure of torture or maybe not gone through measure of torture. It could have been either way. But what distinguishes them is that they actually denied Christ in order to stop the persecution coming at them. So when Decius was killed in battle and his persecution sort of lightened, these groups of people, the confessors and the lapsed, they were wanting to come back into the church, reform the church, bring the church back up again. And this lapsed group caused all kinds of havoc because the church really didn't know what to do with them. And there were basically 3 schools of thought that branched out from this. So these schools of thought were basically a reaction to what are we going to do with this group of people? How do we treat them? So one group was led by Cyprian, and he said, yeah, they can come back into the church under 2 conditions. The local bishop has to say yes, and they have to have some form of penance. And because they were brought back in under condition, and in a way they were going to be taught and reschooled and re-educated and brought back in knowing more than they knew before they left, or hopefully having it, really what it comes down to is a different heart. His viewpoint is known as the School for Sinners. Okay? It's not exclusive to people who believe this specifically, but it is for the groups of people who are more, like, for example, our fellowship, we are more of a school for sinners than we would be a sanctuary for saints. But we don't have all of the stipulation on it. We're more like Novatus than we are Cyprian. But anyway, then the second group, Novatian, he was absolutely mortified at the idea of letting an apostate back into the church. Like, he could not understand why anyone would do that. So no lapse allowed under any condition, except for, remember, upon death, he would let them back in order to save their souls, right? So this sort of idea. So this was more of a sanctuary of saints. So the people who were allowed into the church of Novatian, you couldn't have been an apostate of any sort, and you were protected from the bad, and you were sort of fortified with the good. And so it was more of a sanctuary than it was a school. Does that make sense?
If you were a confessor, you were still allowed in the Novatian?
Yes, absolutely. It's just the lapsed. Yeah, the apostates were the people who denied Christ. That was the issue. I think that and this is just speculation and just coming from my logic and not something that I necessarily read, although I may have heard it somewhere too. if you were in the group of confessors, of lapsed who denied Christ, but you went through some measure of torture, you lost an eye, you lost part of an arm, you lost a toe, you lost all of your family, something like that, as opposed to somebody who was like, no, I'm good, and nothing happened to them at all right off the bat. I think they were treated differently, and I think that's where a lot of this idea of penance comes in. It's this idea of, from a human perspective, it needs to be graded. Somehow, those that did something shouldn't have to do as much as those who did absolutely nothing. So it's sort of where these ideas came from. So anyway, that is the Sanctuary for Saints and the School for Sinners. I just wanted to make sure before we start the next chapter, especially since I put it on your study guide, you have some idea where I was going with that.
So then where's the third guy?
Well, the third guy, he's more of a School for Sinners kind of guy. He just didn't have the stipulations on him.
Gave everybody-
Yeah, as long as you were willing to say yeah. So, and his assumption is that that's between you and God.
Yeah.
Like if you're saying what your heart is not believing, it's going to come out, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if you guys remember this from Acts. I don't even remember what chapter it's in. It's before 11 because we've already studied it Sunday night. The Christian leaders were coming after, where they were going to start going after the Christians, or the people of the way. And Galerius, that's who we're going to talk about. I'm sorry. The very famous teacher, the Jewish teacher that Paul sat under. I can't believe it starts with a G. And it's
Gala something?
Yes, that's right. Okay, I'll have to look it up. Anyway, so this guy, this very famous Jewish teacher, kind of stopped them all and said, look, you don't need to go after and persecute anybody. If these guys are not of God, they're going to go away on their own. Like it's going to knock itself out. But if they are of the Lord, you're going to find yourself fighting against God. So you really ought to be pretty careful about how you approach persecution of Christians. And that was more his attitude. It's not so much prove yourself through action or words or this or that. It's just, okay, if you say your heart is here, it's going to come out. And if you are, great. And if you're not, then, that's really not, that he really has nothing to do with that.
Well, isn't that sort of like what we believe?
Yeah, we're much more of a Novatus fellowship than we are either of these two. But anyway, just so you guys kind of know what's going on. Again, before we get started, I have, there were 3 questions that were posed to me that I couldn't answer with the last lecture. So very, very quickly, I want to go through them and tell you what I found about it. So one of the questions were, why didn't Christians join the army? What was the issue with Christians joining the army? And my answer to you was that I was just assuming that it had to do with the forced pagan practices that would go with being in the government's army. If you look up what you can find online, which may or may not be reliable, by the way, but if you just kind of skim through the internet and look through things, it seems as though the majority of people are trying to say that it's a pacifist idea, like they were, oh no, I'm against war, and oh no, I can't. But really, the few articles that I found that were actually citing history, like where you could go back and find the citations that they were looking for, it was not necessarily just an opinion. It was based on something that they pulled from the history. The 3 papers that I read that had those kinds of citations, they were not so much believing that it was a pacifist issue. They were actually more thinking that, okay, so first of all, let's go back just a little bit. Tertullian, in his early writings, there was some small pockets of persecution at that time, and his apologetic writings going out to the government or whoever would read them were mostly saying, look, you shouldn't be coming after the Christians because they are the very best citizens you're going to have. They're loyal. They support the government. They enjoy the safety and the security that the government offers. It's a win-win situation. And this idea that this one final step that requires pagan worship or, fill in the blank is not a good enough reason for the government to persecute fine citizens of the empire, right? That was basically his argument. Origen also wrote some things about Christians joining the army. His was a little bit different. I didn't read his original writings. This is all coming from this man's synopsis, so I'm hoping that he's correct. But some of the writings apparently that Origen put out, he was actually discouraging people to join into the armies because he was saying you can't serve two places, right? But at the end of Tertullian's time, after he joined Montanus's group and was labeled a heretic, his writings also changed, and he became very strongly against Christians joining the army for that reason, saying, look, choose who you're going to follow. You're either going to follow Caesar or you're going to follow Christ. And he got crazy kind of at the end. Not necessarily right or wrong, I'm not saying that, but his viewpoint definitely changed once his loyalties, maybe, if you want to call it that, changed from just the general Christian church to following Montanus himself. So if you try to find a consistent record of the exact answer, why didn't Christians join the army? Really, you can't even find records of Christians joining the army. Up to a certain point, like almost 100 AD or something like that, there are no records of any Christians being in any army anywhere, anytime at all. It doesn't mean they weren't, but I mean, you just don't have anything to talk about. But then around the writings that come out, I don't know, around 100 or in that general area, you start seeing references to like, for example, Cornelius had already come to Christ, right? He was a Christian centurion, and him being in the army, it's likely, it's not proven, but it's likely he was converted while in the army. And therefore Christians had to have been, or followers of Christ had to be in the army at that time. And there were several examples outside of even their extra biblical examples even of Roman soldiers becoming believers. And it makes sense because Roman soldiers actually were the most, or were part of the group of people that were the most literate, that actually could read and understand and comprehend and apply. Whereas a lot of the non-elite or people that were just people, they were basically illiterate, and they had to verbally and orally hear and understand everything. So these guys could actually read the scriptures if they wanted to. So they kind of were in a different group of people anyway. So there's no consistent record, but they do talk about, especially like again with Decius, one of the ways that he wanted to take Christians, because the persecutions began heavily with him, and his army was sprinkled with them, and he needed to get them out so that he could, continue doing what he wanted to do, but he didn't want to split loyalties like that. And so then it became more of a reality that these Roman gods needed to be worshipped, and this pagan worship needed to happen within the within the army, within the systems of the army. And the Christians who wouldn't do it, they were immediately kicked out. I mean, they were just out of the army. And I mean, given the right circumstances, some of them were killed. So there had to have been an influx of Christians in the service in order for, number one, Decius to remove them, and number two, for all of these, even earlier than that, these even biblical figures to have been converted, because they were basically Roman citizens and in the army. They weren't living in Jewish towns and Jewish areas. They were living in Roman towns and Roman garrison towns. So the two groups of people were pretty split. So anyway, that's the sort of long answer to it. I think that they went into the army without any reservation because they were Roman citizens, and they truly appreciated the Pax Romana that Rome enforced, the security and the safety. And so I think they went in willingly, and they were fine doing what they had to do. I'm sure that there were people, both in Roman citizens and Christian citizens, who were like, I don't want to kill people, I don't want to join the army. I'm sure that was happening, but I don't think it was a movement. But again, I can't prove it. It's just what sort of people are pulling out from the logic of the writings that we have. So if that answers the question, sort of.
So this was people in the army way back then.
Yeah, and there didn't.
Ancient times.
Oh yeah. This was ancient times, and there are people today, according to some of the things. And again, I don't know how accurate this is, but there are people today who are looking back at these historical areas and saying, "Oh yes, the Christians have always been pacifists. That's why we are." And I just don't know that there's any historical evidence to back that. I think that you can assume it and you can infer it, but I'm not sure that there's really any evidence that supports it. So. That's the sort of gray area answer that I could come up with. The second question was, where was Novatus living? Okay, so Novatus was, he started out being a student of Cyprian, and whenever they sort of parted ways, he took off out of Carthage, and he ended up in Rome. He was kind of in the same place that Novatian was in.
I was going to tell you, also, going back to the test, I like the way you put your hands in there.
Oh, did I put hints in it? Good. I'm glad that they're helpful.
Well, it's like you used, where was it? Something about Pastor Clement, and the other one was passed to Origin, and then the one before Origin. I was like, oh, huh. Thanks for the answer.
Right. Yeah. Well, you're welcome. All right. Then the third question, and this one was much harder. The third question was, somebody asked, how are, especially new people, but even people who have been Christians for a long time, how are people who are studying the Word supposed to really understand the difference between allegorical interpretation and literal interpretation when the Bible itself is full of symbolism, like Revelation has all kinds of symbolism in it, and how do you know, how can you separate the symbolism that is accepted and allegorical interpretation, which at least in this fellowship is not accepted? We're a literal translation sort of situation. So what it comes down to, and I'm just going to read these off. I can let you guys look at it later if you want to copy it down. But so basically, symbolism and allegory are not the same thing. Symbolism is an object that stands for another object that gives it meaning. Okay, allegory is a complete narrative that involves characters and events, and they stand on an abstract idea or an event. Okay, so symbols are very small pieces, and allegory is a whole idea, a whole story that's put out there. Okay, so now when you're talking about literal versus allegorical, the literal meaning is what the original writer meant to the original listener or reader or hearer, right? So in that context, what did, Paul mean to say to the Ephesians? That's the literal meaning. What Origen and before him Panaeus, what they did was they took that, they believed that the literal meaning is fine. You can take the literal meaning, look up the Greek and look up the Hebrew and do all that business and look at the literal meaning. But underneath that, hidden underneath that, is what they called a moral parable or some sort of moral lesson. And it's true. I mean, you can kind of see even in our own fellowships, we see, okay, that can apply to today being blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't lose its literal idea. These messages are hidden underneath the literal meaning, and it was intended for more spiritual people, for lack of a better term, just more people who were more in tune spiritually with the scriptures. It's tucked underneath the literal meaning and needs an appropriate interpreter in order to uncover the truth and then relay that truth to other people. So that's already separating things. So that means that if you are not a good interpreter and you read this scripture, you're only able to see the literal meaning. But if you are spiritually inclined, right? Then you have the ability to see underneath that and pull out this moral meaning or whatever. Well, then, especially Origen took that even a step further. And remember that a lot of this stems around they were living in Alexandria in this intellectual capital, and they were trying to have the people who had these great high thoughts listen to the scripture and believe it and go with Christ. And so they were and that's what intellects do. What is the deeper meaning behind this? What is this? How can I make this better? How can I understand this more? How do I break it down and make it and understand? I mean, that's just what people who learn, I mean, even that's what we do with the scriptures. You don't have to be a great intellect to want to look at something and say, how does that work? Where did they get that? Right. I mean, so it's a normal way of going, but in this intellectual center, it was almost an essential if you wanted to get these people to listen to you. So then Origen had what he called mystical symbolism that was sort of one step further than this moral parable idea. It's an even deeper meaning to the scripture, and this is definitely for the spiritually and sort of inherent in that, the intellectually elite. Okay, so these are the things that only these people can understand, right? This mystical symbolism will tie into the current philosophy of the day. So when somebody is allegorically interpreting the scriptures and they get to this level, they're going to use what they know about their own life today, right? Because it's all they know. So they're going to pull from their own philosophies. Therefore, because they're pulling from their own philosophies, the person who is interpreting determines the meaning of the passage. And that's where you come into this, Pastor Kahn calls it the study of first and second opinions. That's what he calls it. But it's where, well, I think this says that. And, but I think it says this. Oh, but I think it says that. And you start getting into all this, whose truth is right, and, blah, blah, blah. And it gets very confusing. It becomes argumentative. It becomes a little bit spiral. It just doesn't do well. And a lot of times it's based on emotion. The person who is giving this mystical, allegorical interpretation, it's coming from a feeling and from an attitude and from putting all of these things together. They're directly tied to it. So when I give you my interpretation and you're like, that's not what I think at all. I think it's this or that. Well, suddenly it's not this that you're questioning anymore. It's now this that you're questioning. Do you see what I'm saying? And so then it's less about having what should be an intelligent discussion about, what does the scripture say? And it goes more into, can I outthink you? Can I out-philosophize you? And it just kind of spirals out of control. So the bottom line is that symbolism in the Bible should be and is quite distinct. But allegorical interpretation takes some part of the scripture and pulls out a whole new story that may or may not agree with other pieces of scripture. And that's where you start getting yourself in trouble. And that's why many of the evangelical churches, at least, are no bueno on the allegory. They are only interested in literal interpretations. And then, as you pointed out, how that doctrine can apply to my life today. Okay? So, those were the questions, and I hope that I have given you adequate answers. Okay. Now, starting with our lecture tonight. Okay, so this is a little bit, like I said earlier before the camera was turned on, so I'll say it again. This is more of a historical road that we're gonna travel down briefly together, but we're gonna end right here with Constantine. This is where we're gonna focus. I just want to write it on the board, less because I want you to have all of this memorized, but really more because I want it to make sense so that as history progresses, you can understand what happened. Okay. gave you a handout at the beginning of this class, and if you look at this big picture that's in the center, it's going to be a pictorial of this, so that you can have something besides, what's up here. You can just use that figure if you want to try to keep things in order. So of course, I do want you to know who Decius is. I do want you to know that his 2 years, you don't have to know they're 249 to 251, but just that his 2 years were very strong persecutions against the Christians. Thus, all this business happened, right? Well, a few emperors later, in 284, we had General Diocletian was on the scene. He was a great general, very strategic, very smart, very strong, just really good at his job. And remember from last time, the empire in this general time frame was kind of in a mess. The economy was not doing all that great. They had these outside attacks coming from especially the western, like out over by France. They were coming down in off of that area. And so Rome was kind of being attacked on its fringes. And remember I think I mentioned this, that the emperors, their reigns were lasting very short. And if it wasn't through, he died in battle, but many of the emperors died because someone else came up behind them and killed everyone that was related to them, and then took power, right? So it was a dangerous time to be an emperor. So General Diocletian at this time is fighting these wars, and he's good at it. He's very good at what he does. He ends up, I think I mentioned this, he was, I forgot the emperor's name, the Arab. It's not Justinian, he's later. Just a minute, let me find his name. So that I said it last week, but I didn't write it down again, and I've forgotten his name now. All right. I talked about Valerian, but he's not the one I'm talking about. All right. I'm going to have to look it up. I'll have to tell you next week. Anyway, so the emperor at this time, General Diocletian was working very well for him. He was rallying the troops, building morale, winning these small battles. Well, the emperor at this time was taken out. The people, the soldiers, when I say the people, it's really the military, they basically went up to Diocletian and said, hey, you should be emperor. You should take over because you're a strategist, you're a builder, and you're strong, you're tough, you're intelligent. You should take over the empire. So basically the people rallied together and made him the emperor, starting in 284. All right? Now, Diocletian was no dummy. Whenever he took reign, he really, from what I understand, didn't really care one way or the other about the Christians. He wasn't necessarily targeting them. He was very pro-Rome, though. He was reviving the Roman gods and the pagan worship and this kind of stuff. He was very pro-Rome. So it's not so much he was against Christianity as much as he was pro the ancient Roman gods and making sure that they are alive in the empire. Now, because he, again, was not stupid, he realized that he was in real danger just being the emperor, that somebody somewhere, or several people around the empire, are looking to take him out and take over the empire, because that's just what was happening, right? Plus, you've got the outside threats, so you're getting attacked all around. So what he decided to do, Rome was pretty big by this time. It was a large piece of land. So what he decided to do is split the empire. He decided to split it in east and west sections, which you can see on your map. And in doing so, what he said was, okay, we're going to set up east and west empires. And on each side of the empire, I'm going to have an emperor that reigns, and I'm going to have a second in command, basically, a Caesar, to support him. Okay? Then, in a given amount of time, which in his case I think was 25 years, maybe 20 or 25 years, in a given amount of time, these emperors will step down from office, and these Caesars will move into their place, and then elect new Caesars. not elect, nothing's elected, but would select new Caesars, okay, to come in their place. And in doing that, what he did was he strengthened, on some level, strengthened the empire by increasing the government, like by increasing. So instead of one man being over the entire empire, they can focus on just half the empire. So it kind of strengthens their viewpoint as long as they get along. And then also it keeps these guys from getting greedy and power hungry and coming up too early and trying to kill him because they know they've got a job in 20 years, right? So he's a strategist. So that's what he did. So Diocletian was the emperor in the East, and he selected a man named Galerius to be his Caesar. Then in the West, this man Maximian was the emperor, and his Caesar was Constantius Chlorus. Constantius Chlorus is Constantine's father. Okay? Now, Constantius Chlorus, I'm just going to give you some background because, again, Constantine's who we're going to focus on. So, Constantius Chlorus, he met his wife, Helena, at a bar. She was a barmaid. And,
Barmaids back then?
well, yes, I do believe they did. And Constantius Chlorus and his wife Helena had a son. His name was Constantine. Okay? Now, after his appointment as Caesar in the West, him having the barmaid wife did not sit so well with the government. That was just not okay. So he sends Helena and Constantine away from him, just sends them to another place, and he ends up marrying another woman. This woman was Maximian's daughter. Okay? So can you see this alliance that's happening? Helena and Constantine are just kind of off in another place. And this is purely allegorical. No, this is just what ifs. I imagine that Constantius Chlorus actually loved Helena. Like I think he very much loved her. And he made a choice for his job. And probably talked about it with her. She probably agreed with him, maybe, I don't know. But anyway, they split. But I don't believe, and I may be wrong about this, but I don't believe they split. Like I think they mutually agreed that she and Constantine would leave, so that his position would not be compromised, right? Or maybe her life. So all of that is pure conjecture. I'm just talking. Maximian? I do not have his daughter's name. I'll have to look it up. But, well, we'll see. So, see? Everybody wants to dig. Anyway, so Constantine and Helena, they head off to Britain. Okay, so they're just hanging, so they're pretty far away. They're still in the West, but they head off to Britain. It doesn't matter. It's not important, but that's where they are. So Constantius Chlorus marries Maximian's daughter, and they reign for the 20 or 25 years that Diocletian promised this guy that he would be able to be Caesar, and also promised these two guys before they would move up, right? So, now this guy Galerius, he was very much anti-Christian. He was all about ridding the planet of the Christians, or the empire. I shouldn't say the planet, the empire. All right. At the very end, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but at the very end of Diocletian's reign, where he had control over who persecuted who, the last couple years of his reign, he actually began to persecute Christians. And it is a theory that his 20 years of being with Galerius and being under his influence greatly influenced him at the end of his reign. I keep saying his life. At the end of his time in power as emperor, may or may not be true, but this guy was definitely anti-Christian. If you look it up, Galerius, what you find most about him, unless you look in like biographies and things like that, if you just generically look up Galerius, what you find most about him is his manner of death. It was really, really awesome. Awful, not awesome. It was really, well, it was awesome in
Awesomely awful.
an awesomely awful way. Yeah, Galerius, I'm going to tell you about it. It was very, very gruesome. It's believed now, looking back on his death, that he probably had diabetes in his healthy life, and that diabetes predisposed him to the things that happened to him at his death. Who knows? It's conjecture, but that's what all the smart medical people seem to think. But anyway, some people say that he acquired a venereal disease, and that's what caused his overall demise. Others are not willing to commit to that specific thing causing anything, but something happened, and he was exposed to something. This disease began in his groin area and began to spread up into his gut. And it wasn't just external, it was internal. So as it spread, as these things happen, it was putting pressure from the inside out on his system. And so he had open sores, maggots had come in and were eating on him actively. Well, yeah, I don't think there were enough of them. but yes, you're right. And some of it was internal. The maggots were on the outside. Actually, the maggots may have been on the inside. I should look that up too. Anyway, it could be. Anyway, they began to eat away on him, at least on the outside, maybe on the inside as well. Because of this, he formed some gangrene, and he smelled very, very bad. Very, very bad. As a matter of fact, it was so strong that you could smell it outside the palace. And from what I've read, I don't mean like outside his room, like you could smell it outside. But I don't know that that's really true. I mean, these things get pretty dramatic as time moves on, you know. But anyway, it did smell very bad. And as a matter of fact, many of the doctors could not enter the room because the smell was so bad they couldn't, and so he had them killed because they wouldn't come in the room. Then other doctors who were able to come into the room, they couldn't get rid of it, they couldn't cure it, they were killed. So he was just, he was desperate and, looking for whatever he could do. Wow. Well, about a week before his death, interestingly, he issued an edict or a decree of toleration toward Christians that reversed and stopped any persecution under his authority. It appears that he believed that his illness was brought on by the God of the Christians. Therefore, at the end of his life, he must have believed it because, if you follow a path of logic, which may or may not be correct, he tried everything he knew how to do his whole life, which is what we all do. We all try to do everything we can do our whole lives outside of asking God for help or accepting his help. And then when none of that works and you come to the end of in this case, the end of your life, but the end of your rope, whatever it is you're struggling with, well, then you're like, oh, well, it must be a God thing. That's apparently what happened to him. Oh, this must be the Christian God that's doing this to me because I've persecuted him my whole life. So he issues this toleration, and he even, as part of it, issues a declaration that says, if you are a Christian and a true Roman citizen, you'll pray for him that this disease would be removed. So, he didn't force people to pray, but he kind of guilted them into it. Like if you really love Rome, if you're really a Christian, if you really this and really that, you'll pray that But he said, quote, "It is the duty of every Christian to pray to their God for my welfare." That's what he said. So, anyway, he just died a terrible, awful death.
Died during his emperor being an emperor?
No. It was after the 20. I'll make sure about that, but no.
I know that he was the second in command, and then he went into an emperor position.
Oh yes, he did. Then it was after. Yes, you're right. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just.
You're totally right. He becomes emperor. No, it's while he's emperor. Yes, it is while he's emperor. I'm sorry. You're totally right. All right. Good for you. Keep me on track. All right. So anyway, so that's Galerius. So there's not too much said about him other than his daughter is, forming this bond or whatever. You can read a lot about him, but for our purposes. So Diocletian and Maximian, they served their 25 years. They stepped down as they said they would. And then Galerius and Constantius Chlorus move up into position. Galerius chooses a man named Maxentius as his Caesar, and Constantius Chlorus chooses his son. That's how he comes back in. Okay. Chooses his son to be the Caesar under him. Okay? And this was in 305 AD. Okay? So
he had to have that communication to be able to find his son.
See? That's right. All right. So as soon as Maxentius, as soon as Maxentius comes into this position, and after Galerius is gone, he and Constantius Chlorus, he ends up stepping down as well. Whenever these two guys become emperor, that's when the magic starts. This is when things really start to happen, all right? Maxentius immediately, as much as you can, begins to come after Constantine. Like that's his very first. So Diocletian's whole idea here is to divide yet unite the empire, and only two Caesars or emperors later, you've got this guy coming after this guy so he can have the whole empire to himself. We knew that was going to happen at some point, but Maxentius is after Constantine because he wants to take the empire for himself. So Constantine, now this is at the very beginning of their reigns. Constantine is still in Britain and he's on his way. Maxentius is in Rome and he's going to intercept. Constantine knows that that's what's going to happen. Maxentius's army is about 200,000 foot soldiers.
Wow.
Yeah. 200,000.
Holy cow.
200,000. Constantine, he's been in Britain hanging out. He's not been part of the military or in the empire. His army is only about 78,000 foot soldiers.
Wow.
But he's coming down and he's going to face him and we're going to see what happens. These two armies in 312 AD, that's an important date. I would remember that date. Here, I'll get rid of this. All right, 312 AD. The two armies meet one another, and the second small picture that's on your handout, they meet just north of Rome along the Tiber River, which runs through Rome, at one of the bridges called the Milvian Bridge. Yep. That is definitely something you need to know, Milvian Bridge. Okay? Constantine and Maxentius meet for battle at this bridge. It is so much fun to look up the images of this bridge because this particular bridge, I don't know why they chose it. Anyway, the bridge itself was out. Like it was under construction. It was what they call a boat bridge. And so there were boats lined up next to each other. Literally like boats lined up next to each other with a walkway going across it.
Wow.
That was the bridge. Yeah. So, if you look it up online and like if you Google Milvian Bridge or whatever, Constantine and Maxentius, whatever, and you go to the images, you can see these hand-drawn, they're hand-drawn images. It's crazy, but whatever. Anyway, so they're going to meet for battle at this bridge. The night before the battle, Constantine, depending on which source you look at, he either had a dream or he had a vision or he had a moment of some sort the night before this battle. And in this vision, he sees the cross of the Christians. And I don't know if he audibly hears, but he hears, "In this sign, conquer." Now, his mom, Helena, was a Christian. She was a believer. So as soon as he saw that cross, he knew what it was, and he understood what that symbolized, right? So that night, after he has his dream or his vision, whichever it was, he rallies everybody around and says, all right, cover all the pagan idols that are on your shields and on your clothes and on your this and on your that, and put the sign of the cross over all of them. Everything you can cover it with the cross. We're going into the battle under the power of the God of the Christians. We're going into the battle for the God of the Christians and with the God of the Christians' help, right? So that's what he does. He gets his 78,000 people to put on the symbol of the cross. Well, the next morning or the next day, whenever they actually start battling, one of the accounts that I read, and only one, but one of the accounts I read, this 200,000 foot soldier business that was going on. Of course, you can't get 200,000 people on one bridge no matter what, but his army was so vast and so huge. When they got out onto the bridge, I mean, it just didn't work out. And as a matter of fact, I believe Maxentius was drowned in the battle. Anyway, Constantine wipes the floor with them. I mean, completely wipes out the army. Maxentius is gone. And suddenly, in one battle, at the very beginning of his time being emperor, he becomes the man. He is over all of Rome.
Who is now?
Constantine. He's wiped out Maxentius at the Milvian Bridge, just north of Rome, and Constantine is now the supreme emperor over all of Rome. Okay? Well, that changes things a little bit. So this happened in 305. Constantine gives credit to the God of the Christians for his survival and his success. And in 313, he issued an edict. An edict or I said it a second ago. An order. The Edict of Milan. This edict officially declared Christianity as an official religion of Rome, and very quickly following became the official religion of Rome. So what that meant was that, I mean, you can say overnight, but in a very short amount of time, like we've been suffering persecution since 249, at least, this is heavy, pockets of it prior. But now suddenly, in 313, the Christians who were hiding in the catacombs, dodging the soldiers with their portable altars and their incense, all of a sudden, they come out of the hiding and they're accepted. If you wanted a good job, you were a Christian. If you wanted to go to a good school, you were a Christian. If you wanted a good government appointment, you were a Christian. It suddenly became very advantageous to be a Christian. And it just was overwhelming for those people, especially those people who literally one night were hiding and the next day were brought out and celebrated at banquets or invited to banquets and, whatever, allowed back into normal society. So it was a big deal. This was a big deal. Now, along with that, we've had this concept of when the church is persecuted, it becomes very strong and it grows. And whenever it is not being persecuted, it tends to become weak and watered down, stagnant. Well, you can imagine this is kind of a perfect picture of that. When Decius was in control and you knew you were going to die if he caught you, only an honestly true, in their heart of hearts, Christian is going to stay that way. The people who are on the fence, not so sure, could go either way, whatever, they're gone. I mean, they're not going to risk, they're not going to set their lives down for something they don't truly believe in. And that is why the church became strong, because only true believers made up the church. with this edict, while it was wonderful to, not be sleeping in caves and underground and, whatever it was they were doing, over time, because it was so advantageous to be a Christian, everybody wanted to be a Christian. The pagan priests became Christian priests. The pagans became Christians. Everybody was a Christian because that's how you got a good job. That's how you kept your good job. That's how you married into good families. That's, everything. That's how you got your kids into the good schools and, whatever. I mean, it was, I'm sure, a lot like it is now. And so it's who you know. Or who you claim to be, maybe, in this case. So this edict, in effect, over the years, caused the stagnation of the church. Now, doesn't mean it was a bad edict. I'm not saying it was a bad edict. I'm just saying, in contrast to heavy persecution, where only the truest believers are staying in the church, to this point where anyone and everyone who just wants to survive with ease can be a Christian, it just changed things a little bit. So, all right. Most of what I've read claims that Constantine himself was a Christian. His lifestyle and his actions do not support that. I don't know if he was a Christian or not for me to say. But he was responsible for executing people. He conspired against in order to execute people. Yes. Yeah. So I'm just not sure that he was. I don't know if he felt like he was grandfathered in. What does Pastor Khan say? God has no grandchildren. So anyway, each person has to make their own choice. It can't be, you can't grandfather. Yeah. Is that right? So anyway, but he did do some, along with this edict, he stopped all of the gladiator games that were happening where Christians were being killed for sport. He stopped the crucifixions that were happening.
So is this when we were having the gladiator games?
Yeah,
this time?
yeah. And it's actually happening even before that, even back at the time when the pastors were being killed at Smyrna, like Polycarp and all those guys, they were still even happening then because they were taking them to Rome and either burning them or they were throwing them to the lions and that kind of stuff. So they were happening. They were happening already. Crucifixions. He made Sunday a public holiday, and actually, Pastor Khan just went over this. I don't know if you guys were there for the lesson or not, but like I said, the pagan priests even became Christian priests or Christian pastors, Christian teachers, and they were still celebrating, though, all of the pagan holidays that were happening, because that's who they were. I mean, they were not really Christians, they were really pagans. And so the summer solstice, it was a time whenever they had the worship of the inconquerable sun as an sun. And in order to, again, this is actually a lot like Antioch, in order to try to kind of blend things together and make everybody copacetic, it became a service where they were celebrating the inconquerable son. And it happened to be it's the winter solstice, and it happened to be happening in the fall and the winter of the year, and they were bringing in trees, which is a pagan. Yep, bringing in evergreens and exchanging gifts and doing all this stuff, and it was all sort of, let's just keep celebrating the inconquerable sun. Let's call it a mass. Let's call it a Christian mass. Let's call it Christ's mass. Let's call it Christ Mass. Yeah, call it Christ Mass. And we just call it Christmas now. Now, does that mean that Christmas is bad? No. No, it doesn't. It just means that it is very likely not when Jesus was born. I mean, what we as the Christian community tries to celebrate Christmas, it really is an extension of what the pagan priests were trying to do in meld, and the Christian. I mean, they were all working together, trying to meld these two worlds together and have them function because they were living together, right? So anyway, so that is sort of how the church begins to get watered down. It's called, all of these processes, they end up culminating in what is called the secularization of the church. And this happens anytime it's easy. Being, if it's easy to be a Christian, and especially if it's advantageous. Because way back when, it was easy to be a Christian because they weren't really being persecuted. But remember what the Bithynia governor said? Why am I having such an issue with names? Pliny. Remember what he said? Or I don't know if I read it to you or not, but in his writings, one of the things he said was, it's basically all the degenerates are the Christians. It's the women and the illiterate and the poor and the this. I mean, they're all of them are Christians, blah, blah, blah. Well, that wasn't necessarily advantageous to be a Christian because they were kind of a lesser society or whatever. But it was easy. Here, it's easy and advantageous. And over time, especially as this melding of worlds continued to happen, then the government, Constantine, began putting his hand into the church, which is not really what was supposed to be happening. That was not what the forefathers had in mind. And then the people, so the government gets into the church, and then the people are not truly interested in living their life for Christ. Some are, but in general, that's not the right. And that's really, if you think about the churches today, in this country at least, that's really what it is. I mean, you do have true, honest believers, and then you have people that, and then you have people that come in and what's actually really scary is they truly believe that all they have to do is go to church, or whatever it is that they've been taught, or what they assume, or what they choose to believe. Whatever. I mean, there's lots of different ways to think of it, but we definitely are in a secularized church environment, as opposed to being in a pure church environment, because we're not being persecuted. All right, so all right. All right, so there was a little bit, I don't really know if I want to go into this. Constantine actually did appoint his brother-in-law for a little while to be kind of a co-emperor with him. His name was Licinius, and they kind of had differing opinions, whatever. Well, anyway, that did not last very long. So Constantine ended up being the overall emperor. If you look it up, he actually did he tried to co-emperor with somebody, and it just didn't work out very well. So Constantine is now taking this divided empire, and he's going to reunite the empire. That's his big, or what he wants to be, his huge claim to fame. He's going to reunite the empire. And he's decided that he is going to use Christianity to do that. Okay? Because remember, Rome in general was all about uniting. And in the very beginning, like what we talked about with their techniques, this Pax Romana, this enforced peace, they went into a place, they got all the criminals out, they repaired things, they made roads, they enforced this language that everyone needed to know. You could keep your own language, but you had to know Koine Greek, blah, blah, blah. And so they put this society in order where it was safe, it was easy to travel, it was encouraged to travel, you could talk to anybody anywhere you went, and so, it was a good thing. Well, Constantine, on some level, was trying to get that kind of united empire back. And what he chose to use was Christianity to unite the empire, beginning with this edict, okay? Now, Constantine did something interesting. Whenever he went up against his brother-in-law, Licinius, interestingly enough, was his headquarters at that time was in Byzantium. Licinius. This is just background, though. You don't really need to. I mean, if you can write it down so that you know it, but I'm not going to test you on Licinius at all. But if you have your other map, so that you know where Byzantium is, it is. Oh, I think so. Let me see. Oh, yeah, that'll work.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay.
Right by Bithynia.
Yep, it's up by the Black Sea.
Yeah.
Yep, okay. So Byzantium, that is where Licinius was, that's where his headquarters were. And Constantine gets into battle with him, whatever, just wipes him out, like that's a done deal. And so then Constantine decides that he's going to throw a big party. And of course, being, people do these things. He decides to throw a big party up in Byzantium in Licinius's old
Oh, wow.
headquarters.
Yeah.
Yep. Goes up there, throws a big, huge party. And in doing so, he renames the city from Byzantium to Constantinople. Renames the city after himself. Make sure I spell it right. Constantinople. Today it's Istanbul, but
Oh, is it really?
so he renames that city Constantinople. Not only that, but he decides to move. He decides he's going to stay there. It's beautiful. Okay, he decides he's going to live there. That's going to be his new capital headquarters.
And so
All right.
this is like,
This is Constantine. So Constantine tried to be a co-emperor with Licinius, which was his brother-in-law.
how do you spell it?
L-I-C, I'm looking for it, I-N-I-U-S. Okay? He gives it a shot. They don't get along so well. They go to battle, and he defeats Licinius. But Licinius, this was where his headquarters was. Okay? So then Constantine goes to his headquarters after he defeats him, goes up to Byzantium, and says, all right, we're now calling this town Constantinople because it's now going to be my new headquarters. This is where the new headquarters for all the empire is going to be. Do you all know where the headquarters were in all of the empire? Where it used to be? What city do you think used to be the main city in all the empire before Constantine? Rome. Rome was the big city, right? That's where the center of religion was. That's where the center of government was. Everything was centered in Rome, right? Constantine wins this battle, goes to Byzantium, falls in love with it, decides this is going to be the new headquarters, and moves it and says this is now the new government and religious center of the empire. And many people from that point on called it the New Rome. Okay? That was a bold move. So now, catch this. Let's see. I guess I'll keep pointing at you two. All right. So now you're the pastor in Rome, and you're the pastor in Byzantium. Okay? So you have got a lot of authority. You've got people who are coming to you for help. You're issuing all these things. You're basically running the empire on a religious level, sort of, right? Okay. You are underneath the main bishop at Rome because whoever is the bishop in Rome is the bishop of the empire, right? So you're underneath and you're just doing your thing, having your services, loving the Lord, doing your business, right? Well, then he throws this party, changes it to Constantinople and says, you're now the bishop of the empire.
Oh, wow, okay.
Because you're in the center. Now you're in the new religious center of the empire. So now you're the bishop of the empire.
Oh, yeah, I see.
And now this one over here is going, what? Right? Say what? And actually the empire, even on some level, is like, what? I'm like the citizens that lived in Rome, what? This is not the capital of the empire anymore? The citizens in Constantinople are like, woo! They're all about it. They're excited, right? And the people in Rome are like, whiplash. Whoa, what just happened, right? But Constantine doesn't care. He's the emperor, and this is what he's decided to do, and that's the end of it, right? And what he says goes. So there's a little bit of, way underneath, there's a little bit of a rift that's happening to the empire because of this move, okay? All right. Now, Rome is not too pleased with all of this. So the primary cities are of the Roman Empire are Antioch in Syria, Jerusalem. Even though it's been destroyed, it has kind of an honorary position as an empire city. Alexandria and Rome, but now Rome has kind of been usurped. It's still a major city. It's still an important city. There's still a lot of functioning that's coming out of the city. It didn't just die, but it's been usurped. That doesn't sit too well with people who live there. All right. So again, Constantine is trying to use Christianity to unite the empire. All right. So all of that is happening. This move is happening. People are freaking out, right? All right. Now, let's go to a different city. We're going to go into Alexandria for just a few minutes. The bishop in Alexandria is Alexander. It doesn't matter. You can write it down if you want, but I'm not going to test you on that. And he is one day giving this message on the Trinity. He's just giving a message on the Trinity. An elder whose name is Arius is in the crowd listening to his message. And he begins to question and ultimately heckle this bishop. And he's saying that message of the Trinity is all wrong. Arius, so the Trinity says that there's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and they're all one, all equal, right? Arius said, no. The Father and the Son are two different entities. The Father has always existed, but the Son has not. He says that the Father created the Son, and then the Son created all of us, everything that we know. Okay? So it was a stepwise thing.
So the Father created the Son, and the Son created
everything.
Yes.
Yeah. Like in the beginning there was the Son, but he was created, not continuous like the Father.
Right.
All right. So Alexander kind of freaks out and he's like, "What are you talking about?" Like it's a little bit shocking for him. So he calls a pastors' conference, basically. He calls together, 100 or so pastors from around the area. They discuss these claims of Arius, and they determine that what he is saying is heretical. So they proclaim him as a heretic, and his heresy from that point forward is known as the Arian, Arian, the Arian heresy. Okay, so this idea that the Son is a created being is the Arian heresy. All right, now, Arius has his friends. He's got bishops here and there that are his friends, and then Alexander has his friends a little bit more because most of the people call this a heresy. And so there's kind of this fight that begins between, I guess, regular Christianity and then this man Arius and his belief system, right? There begins to be conflict in the church, all right? Constantine is trying to unite the empire using Christianity. This little fight that's happening between the bishops, Constantine is not impressed with it at all. So Constantine finds out about all of this, and he basically sends out a message, and he says, "All right, you guys, whatever this is that's happening right here, get it figured out, and get it figured out quick, and cut the nonsense, because this is not okay. Stop it, because this is my uniting tool. So stop fighting," right? So now Constantine is kind of setting out his feelers. He's starting to get a little bit upset, and he decides, because this fighting doesn't stop, this is amazing. He decides in 325, this is an important date too, 325 AD, he decides that he is going to settle this issue and maybe any other underlying issues, but this issue once and for all. So what he does is he sends out an invitation to all the pastors in the entire empire. He sends out all of this, this invitation to all these pastors, and he says, all right, what I want you all to do is I want all of you guys to come up here, and we're going to have a meeting, all of us together. And we are going to figure this out, and we're going to stop the fighting, and we're going to be a united empire, right? Now, not all of these bishops have the tools or the resources to be able to do what he's asking. They want to go. He actually pays for anyone who needs it. He pays for all of these bishops, whoever needs the help. He pays for their travel to come up to Constantinople and meet. He has a home, a quite large home, and he brings everybody into his home. So get the picture. Like 15 years ago, people were still being persecuted by the government. Now you've got the empire, the emperor of the entire empire, the emperor, inviting you, paying your way, and bringing you to his house to have this meeting. Like, it's crazy, right? It's like, whatever. Okay, so now, yeah, it's just so interesting. So, now remember, Rome is a little bit upset with him, right? And they're like, not. It's not that they don't want to go to the council. It's not that, but they're just like, you know, they're still a little bit messed up. They haven't healed yet. They're still licking wounds. So he calls all these pastors up, and they end up meeting for this council. This is very important. This meeting is called the Council of Nicaea. Okay? The Council of Nicaea. This 100 or so pastors get together primarily to discuss this issue and to figure out what we're going to do about it. So, are you seeing kind of a pattern? I mean, not that this is wrong, I'm just saying, are you noticing a pattern? So whenever you had the church first formed, you had Marcion and Montanus and these other heretics, but those two in particular, you had all these heretics, and they started coming out and fighting the church. So what was the response? The church put together a formal canon. This is what we believe, and stop talking about other things. This is what we believe, right? So then heavy persecution hits the church. These three groups form. The response to those three groups when the persecution dies down is these three schools of thought that are still alive today, right? So all of these responses to what's going on. And I mean, what else can you do? You have to respond to things as they happen. So it's not a criticism, it's just a pattern. And so now you've got Constantine, who has, without really that being his plan, has become emperor of the entire empire and wants to unite it, decides to use Christianity, and then you've got this Yahoo coming up and causing all kinds of trouble. And so the reaction to that is to bring everybody up here to fight it. But before that, he tooted his horn pretty loud and kind of upset some of the West, right? But they still show up, but they send representatives, like the pastor, like, you know, I mean, whatever. Anyway, so they all show up, and it's basically to deal with this Arian heresy. So Arius himself shows up, a few of his friends show up, and they go back and forth, and they are discussing or debating their ideas. One of the guys, you know, there were also pastors in there saying, "Can't we just get along? You know, I mean, can't we just stop fighting?" And, you know, of course, that's not going to happen. Arius is like, "No, you know, Christ is a created being," and the church is like, blasphemy! You know, like they don't know how to handle it. So this has got to be dealt with. So, the result of the Council of Nicaea is that Christ has always been. He is not a created being. And the document that came out that expresses that is called the Nicene Creed. That is said in churches, some churches, every service. And as part of, I don't think I brought the actual creed with me, but But-
He wasn't, I'm sorry, you were saying Christ has always been, he what?
Not,
he is not a created being. There are, I hope I can find it. I should have found it before. There are certain pieces of the creed that were put in specifically, huh?
the Catholic Mass.
Although it's recognized by all manner of Christian, I mean, it doesn't, not just Catholics.
Yeah.
I don't know where it is. I'll have to bring it for the next time, I guess. But there is a section of the creed, we can probably find it on on a phone, that very specifically states, under no uncertain terms, that God the Father and God the Son are equal. And that creed is a direct result of the Arian heresy. And so from this point on, it went from being just a few pastors, gathering together here and there and saying, you're a heretic, to full on the entire Christian community declaring Arius is a heretic and that doctrine is heresy. So it came out of this council, and this creed is the document still used today.
Yeah. 'Cause I'm trying to think of it. I've said the Nicene Creed.
Oh, I have too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I used to be a member of the Episcopalian Church, and we said it every single time. Every time we had a service, we said it. So, anyway,
I believe in the Father.
We believe in God, the Father, and the Almighty Son or something.
yes, I really should have looked. I don't even know where my phone is, you guys. Anyway, I will bring a copy of the creed, and we'll do that first thing next time, and we can go over it. But anyway, so these few steps in history, we went from being persecuted to dividing the empire to trying to reunite the empire, and Christianity happens to be the center around Constantine's idea of reuniting, and he ruffles a few feathers, gets some people distressed. And really makes a few friends up by the Black Sea. I mean, they're really happy about the whole thing. So, do you all have questions about any of this?
Oh, I didn't have a question, but I wanted you to tell me, they considered Sunday what? I didn't get to write that.
Well, it was,
holiday, right?
yeah. He just declared an official holiday based around. It was just he just declared a day of the week for services for the Christian religion. And then sort of melted into that, I talked about certain holidays being transformed from pagan into Christian.
Christianity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but he allowed the Christians to have a day of the week to recognize their official religion in the Roman Empire. So this section in the book is all about the Christian Empire, the Roman Empire. Speaking of that,
It's right here, so it's and in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, begotten of the Father, before all words. Is that what you're...
that's the one. And actually, as you continue to read down through it, there were other issues that were addressed as part of this council, and some of those things are pulled into. I mean, you can read about it, and the whole creed is to cover several things, but the primary reason for the council and the primary reason for the document was a response to the Arian heresy, which is still very much alive today.
Right. Crazy.
So, yeah. So we are kind of, yeah. Yeah, we are so very much influenced by things that happened, in 325 AD.
Wow.
It's amazing.
It goes back a long ways.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And it's interesting. What I really love about it is, I mean, all the dates and the drama and the intrigue is really fun. But really what I love about church history is that it's really more of the same. Like, we still behave the same way.
Yep.
We still react to things, and big movements happen out of reaction, which again, I mean, I don't know how to change that or how to make it better, or even, I'm not even saying that any of it's wrong. It's just interesting. I mean, human nature, you know, we get some people of power get upset and they do something about it. And then the people, you know, maybe suffer underneath that for a little while, and then somebody comes up and then it all changes. And then that happens for a little while. And then somebody else comes up and ruffles feathers, and then that changes and something.
They still do say this every Sunday in church, in the Catholic
Yeah.
Church.
Yeah.
They said God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, unmade, one in the Spirit, with the Holy Spirit.
One in the Spirit with the Holy Spirit. Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Directly to
The heresy.
officially
Heresy.
declare this a heresy and get rid of it. All right, guys. Thank you very much. Your homework for this week, I know, is 2 chapters, chapter 9 and chapter 10. Okay?